Are you recording now? Because obviously I'm going to have to do a little bit just before things actually start while the intro's going on. Just like the last one. Like, the first time we're doing really a night shoot, a proper night shoot at 20 to midnight. So, you know, want people to get the gist of that. Hello, my name's Mark. You're watching Scott and the Dot, Part 2, Depression 101, which is about triggers. What triggers you? First of all, there's not really a lot I can say about triggers. And the reason for that is different triggers work for different people. What triggers you doesn't necessarily trigger me. So if I can't talk about triggers because they're so different, because if you ask 100 people what triggers them, you'll get 100 different answers. Let's go back to basics, which is why this series is called Depression 101. What is depression? Depression, in its purest form, is a mental state. I don't want to say state of mind. Depression is a mental state. I don't wish to call it a state of mind because that itself can trigger some people who are depressed and say, oh, it's not a state of mind. Despite the fact they're so far down that spiral, they feel somehow triggered by that. But in its purest form, let's talk basics here. In its purest form, depression is a mental state which allows your mind to allude to things which aren't necessarily true. Before I say anything else, let's go with a disclaimer. I'm not a doctor. I'm not a professional. I'm not in any way at all qualified to talk about depression, except for the fact that I've been through it myself. It wasn't diagnosed, I must make that clear, it wasn't diagnosed as depression. I wasn't on any medication for it, okay? These videos, part 1 included, this one and the ones that follow thereafter, they all form my experience with it. And that's the only way it should be consumed as entertainment. Don't use it as directions, although if you feel you can actually get something from these videos and implement it into your own life, that can only be a good thing, right? But don't take it too literally, that's all I'm saying. So depression is an illusory mental state. It gives you the illusion that certain things are not the way they seem, and that can be true sometimes and that can be not true sometimes. I like to think of depression along with things like paranoia and anxiety as things that make up your irrationale, right, as opposed to your rationale, which is more logical thinking, deductive thinking, whereas depression and stuff are irrationals. Both of them are required to live life. We all need a little bit of anxiety or paranoia or depression in our lives, but we can't rely too heavily on them because they're not always true. Logical deductive reasoning is the good side of filling in the blanks and getting it right, whereas with depression you could be filling in the blanks and you could be making a whole load of shit up that just fits your skewed perspective and scenario in your head, and that makes sense to you at the time because of how you're thinking, because of your skewed perspective, because of depression. There's a very thin line between both of them. It also acts as a defense mechanism in a way where being depressed allows us to say no to a lot more things a lot more easily, and therefore put obstacles in front of ourselves to stop ourselves subconsciously going into situations which may trigger us further. Now, to elaborate a bit more about triggers, it could be a single event, it could be a series of events, it could be a career worth of events having a drip effect on you. But one way or another you could slip into depression, and that's why these videos are here, to try and help myself and to help you maybe. If it's left unchecked, this kind of automatic mental state of saying no to things and putting obstacles in front of ourselves could act like a kind of fight or flight thing, and we could end up just saying no to most things. and missing out on a lot of things. And you end up becoming, I think the best analogy is actually a song by Travis called Driftwood. You literally become driftwood, just going along with the flow of the tide, rather than actually taking conscious control of your decisions in everyday life and doing what you actually want to do or need to get done. Now, the thing about triggers, no matter who you are or what triggers you, is that sometimes other people can see them as quite insignificant, quite trivial, quite mundane. As I said earlier, what triggers you might not trigger me. You could be about to brush your teeth, get the cap off the toothpaste, and it flips off like the bottle cap challenge and goes on the floor, and you could be brought to tears just by that, because you feel as if nothing is going right for you. Whereas on a better day, you could do the same thing and you could laugh at it. And that's the difference between how depression makes us feel on a daily basis and how it doesn't. I'm going to talk more in depth about that in the third video about how depression affects our everyday lives. That's definitely another thing for another time, a whole video in itself. But let's talk about getting into depression. What can you do to try and stop yourself sliding into depression? If you've been depressed before, and I'm going to assume you have, since you're watching this video, otherwise why else would you be here? Then you already know some of the signs and symptoms of being depressed. Now, as I explained a little bit in part 1, and if you haven't watched part 1, what are you doing here at part 2? Are you one of those sociopaths that goes to Netflix and watches like the middle of a series first? Come on, go watch part 1 first. We'll wait. Right, you're back now? Good. Right. How I got back from that dark place, as I explained in part 1, was I chose to write about my experiences. And as I said in part 1 as well, I just started out writing for the sake of writing, just for the sake of doing something, anything, just to keep my mind active on something else in the immediate aftermath of almost committing suicide. And the first night and the second night, it was gobbledygook. It really was. That's why I've never kept any of it as well, because it was just rubbish, utter rubbish. And then on the third night, as I started on the next bit of paper, it started to make sense. It started to coalesce into something more coherent. Now, in this day and age, you might perhaps want to keep a vlog or a blog. You don't have to video it, you don't have to make it public either, you can privatise it. But just something for your own sake, something to type out, just go over and analyse every single thought and action in that event or string of events or circumstances that led up to you slipping into depression. And when you analyse it as deeply as that, as introspectively as that, then you start to recognise the patterns that lead up to that, leading up to the triggering event. I mean, I don't just mean analyse, I mean really deconstruct it. Deconstruct every possible viable option of every particular choice that was made. Could you have played it differently? Could others have meant something different by what they did at the time? Things like that. You've got to really go in depth with it and really thoroughly analyse yourself with it. If you do this, you can start to realise that maybe your perspective at the time might have been skewed by your mental state of being depressed. So recognise the symptoms. Secondly, you've got to realise, once you've analysed the potential initial triggers or trigger, it should be possible to realise that things have played out even in a slightly different way. It would not have become this overshadowing trigger in your life that's been haunting you for weeks or months or even years in some cases. Take full and acknowledged responsibility for your own fault in things and for other people's. Don't take responsibility for their fault. Recognise that other people had a part to play in it. Also in video 3, we're going to talk about the difference between being a victim and being a survivor as well. So that's something else for you to think about between now and the next video. By the same token, once you've processed these events properly, you should be able to be in a position to fully comprehend which parts just weren't your fault and things you had no control over. When you realise, when you're out of a depressive state, you come to know that not everything is within your control. You can only change what you can control, and everything else is out with your control. So why are you so worried about that? Again, that's something else I'll talk about in upcoming videos. When this is done correctly, you can consciously prepare far better for the next time you're going to slip into that kind of mindset, or whether it creeps up on you, and you can take better actions to combat it, to recognise and to realise it. Now, the last thing I want you to do is to readjust, okay? And this is part of recognising and realising what's happening, is that you readjust your attitude towards it in order that you can combat it better and stop it from happening, stop it from affecting you as much as it previously did. Once you know and understand fully how you've been triggered into depression previously, then you're better armed to recognise it happening again, consciously and subconsciously. You can now consciously combat it when you feel it happening again in future. So these 3 steps: recognise, realise and readjust. They don't magically lift your depression, but they give you the tools to combat its happening again and starting again, and set you on your way to a better state of mind to deal with it and manage it in future. If you know the symptoms, and sometimes these can include negative thought patterns, changes in appetite, changes in sleep cycle, self-blame for pretty much everything, any or all of these can eventually lead to you slipping into a depressive state of mind. If you feel even worse than that, thoughts of despair or suicide, I would urge you, again, as I said in the first video, to seek professional help as soon as you can. If there's nothing in your area to do that with, if there's no facility or contingency to do that with in your area, talk to someone, anyone, a stranger on your Facebook friends list, anyone will do. Just talk to someone. It makes you feel so much better. A problem shared is indeed a problem halved, and it goes some way to helping you out of that mindset. I was trying to think of maybe, I don't know, some kind of hashtag to try and get interest in these videos, and one I came up with was a line from the Justice League where the Flash is talking to Batman and he's saying how inexperienced he is. Well, I've never done battle, what do I do here, what do I do? And Ben Affleck as Batman says to him, save one person. That's all you have to do, save one person. And if you suffer from depressive thoughts, or you know someone who does, then either talk to or urge them to talk to someone. So hashtag save one person. If it gets trending, that's great. If it doesn't, fair enough, but at least it's out there and you know about it, okay? In the next video, I'm going to discuss how depression affects us from the moment we wake to the moment we fall asleep, and why, when we're depressed, our attitude frankly stinks. I don't mean that in a bad way, but it's just the way our brain tricks us into doing things. I'm going to explore that a bit more. Until then, stick around until next week to see part 3, and I'll see you then. Okay? Bye for now.